So I want to tell a little bit about my perspective on edTPA and how I came to it. I spent the first 20 years of my career as a school-based educator. I was a teacher and school leader, and then I was a school founder of a public school before there were charters, and we won't have to get into that argument. And in the school that I created, which was a learner-centered, project-based, performance-based school, my colleagues and I, did amazing work to support exciting, growing minds, and all with children from under-resourced communities who were predominantly from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. And what I found as the principal of that school was no matter what we demonstrated, and no matter how much the performance, observational, documentation, project-based assessments we created for ourselves and our own learning and the learning of our families, the loudest voice that spoke to the public was the standardized tests that kids had to take every spring. And those standardized tests, as I'm sure most here will agree, are very limited in what they can do and demonstrate about what children know, and that in fact that they drive the curriculum in dysfunctional ways and are disproportionately impact children of color and children from poor backgrounds. So I was very pleased. So I got involved in trying to take the performance assessments that colleagues that I knew from around the city and around the country were doing in our schools to try to develop some ways of making those at a larger scale so that they could be used for the accountability measures that we were being held to for our work. And I was very pleased to find at the same time that there were growing performance assessment initiatives in our profession. The National Board for Professional Teaching Standards was developing at that time. The in-task standards and portfolio was developing at that time. There was work going on in Connecticut to create a performance assessment for teachers. And then work began in California 10 years ago. And all of this work was developed by the profession for the profession. And the idea behind it was that teaching as a profession has always been subject to the whims of politicians, the misunderstandings of the public, and that it's important for the profession to take ownership of how we hold ourselves accountable and how we do the work that we do. All professions have some building blocks. They have an agreed upon knowledge base. They have standards of practice. And they have professional certification. Any profession that works with people has a professional certification. Whether you're a barber, or an electrician, or a pilot, or a nurse, or an architect, a lawyer, or a physician, if you're working with people and you have to and it's important, each profession has developed standards to ensure that the people in their profession are safe to practice and ready to go to work with human beings. So that's why the profession has embraced creating an assessment that will demonstrate to the public that we are safe to practice and do the work that we do with young children. We don't have the luxury of being private about what we do. We affect children's lives, and in a public education system, which is a foundation of democracy. And it's important that we be able to demonstrate that we can do no harm. And so that's what the edTPA is really all about. It started actually as a grassroots effort. It started in California with teachers and teacher educators who wanted to demonstrate a way to show that they were effective, ready to teach teachers. And what happened was, as faculty members moved from one campus to another, from state to state, it grew to a larger group of people all around the country. And it was then that a consortium was developed, the edTPA consortium. And it had input, and the California assessment that had been designed by a smaller group was enlarged to have a larger group of professionals that included people from professional associations and from subject matter associations to create what's now called the edTPA. It's unusual because in other professions, they create the standards, but they don't create the assessment. edTPA is unique because it is created by the profession, for the profession, owned by the profession, and driven by the profession. And Stanford is not the owner or the Pearson is not the owner or the scorer of edTPA. Pearson is operating the platform on which edTPA is being used. It's much like a publisher. When you write a book, you don't self-publish it, you send it to a publisher. Many of your publishers are probably owned by Pearson. Yes, they are a large conglomerate, but that's the way our society is right now. Those who are involved in edTPA and support it are not a small number, and I urge you to consider that. It's happening in 34 states, in over 500 campuses. Thousands of teacher candidates, this data is a little bit old, have been involved in the development, in the scoring, and as you can see, it's spread around the country. The states in color are the states that are using it. Most of you know what it is. I'm going to give you just an overview of it. It has 3 tasks, 4 for elementary, and they basically ask candidates to demonstrate the essentials of what teaching is all about, that you know how to plan, that you can actually instruct in front of a group of kids, and that you know how to assess work. And it's not dictated work. You can bring and design any kind of learning experience you want. I don't believe that it limits teaching, that it narrows the idea of teaching. Whatever your idea of teaching is, you can demonstrate in the edTPA. It's some foundational practices that the profession has agreed upon are critical for being able to stand in front of work with a group of children or stand in front of a class and teach. Because we are in a high-stakes, accountability, standards-based environment, it has been mapped to the standards, and that's not hard to do. I took, as an early childhood teacher, and learning experiences, a set of learning experiences that I had observed one of my candidates doing, a study of a subway, a really rich study where the kids visited the subway, they came back and they turned their dramatic play area into a subway station, they made subway maps, they made metro cards, they made newspapers you read in the subway, and I was able to write that as a sample, write that study up for the edTPA. It was an authentic, learner-centered, active-oriented study, and any good, rich curriculum can be done for the edTPA. The assessment is done around, the rubrics are designed around these important aspects, and they range from 1 to 5, 1 meaning a teacher who is not ready, to 5 being a highly accomplished teacher. And it's all designed around the notion of what is a beginning teacher who is ready to teach. It is not scored by Pearson. It is scored by teachers and teacher educators who go through a rigorous process in terms of being allowed to be scorers, and then in terms of learning how to look at evidence in relation to descriptions of practice. Why is this why is this criticized when in some settings there's only one individual, sometimes a supervisor, who has no relation to a school or little relation to a school faculty, who's making a judgment about a candidate's readiness? The edTPA is providing a shift. It's asking us to take a shift, and the field is asking us to take a shift from thinking about teaching as just delivering curriculum to having an impact, positive impact on student learning. To think about certification, go from thinking of certification as entitlement for completing a program to really demonstrating that you know how to teach. And the big one for faculties, and I know this is a big shift in the culture of universities, is thinking that you're not just have your own individual responsibility to teach your course and do what you want, that you as a community of practice are working together to produce teachers who are going to be good for kids and our schools. So faculty are taking on this work. They've done heroic things. I was just talking to my colleagues from City College this morning about the work that's gone on in the elementary ed program and how excited and involved people feel about actually focusing on clinical practice and getting to work together as a group to improve teaching. A lot of changes have been made in our programs. I'm a program director, so I'm under the same stresses that many of you are. We've had to make a lot of changes. We've had to think about things, all of the things we were doing already, but we had to think about them and make sure that we were more intentionally lifting them up in our programs. But there are concerns. I know you're going to spend the afternoon talking about your concerns. I have concerns. Concerns I've heard particularly is like what a huge shift this is. And about it, mostly the ones that I have heard and I'm experiencing myself are implementation kinds of concerns. The time that you need to just make a shift like this and build the capacity for everybody to be ready to give candidates the opportunity to learn and prepare for what is being asked of them. And that so many changes are going on at once. We have 3 other bubble tests that our candidates have to take. Why is nobody talking about Pearson's involvement in that? Why is nobody complaining about the corporatization of education, about those assessments? Those assessments, as one of my colleagues here who just took it last week said, you know, that test has nothing to do, very little to do with what I have to do as a teacher. People can take that test without ever going to a teacher education program. This is an assessment that's looking at what you know and what you can do and how you reflect on it. And it's asking members of your community, your profession, to be able to look at it and say the same thing, that you can do what you purport you can do. To me, I think that's powerful. And if I might, I would like to just share just a bit the words of some candidates who took the field test. Oh, it's not working. The sound. You told me the sound would work, and it's not. You can't hear it, can you?
I am so much more mindful of my students.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I interviewed some candidates who were part of the field test last spring. And basically what they said is they felt that doing the edTPA helped them become more mindful of their students. more conscious of the real work that is needed to be done when you are entering a classroom and overseeing that classroom. And that they saw it as a lot of work with a lot of glitches, especially at the beginning, but that it was overall a really positive experience. And I hope that you will consider the voices of others who are on the other panels who have had that kind of experience, and consider the thousands of people around the country who feel the same way, that edTPA is by the profession, for the profession, and it's our voice and our way of taking ownership of who we are. It's our pushback against looking at teacher effectiveness only through standardized test scores, through value-added measures, and through those bubble tests that we know are so limited in what they demonstrate. We all care about kids. We all care about making schools better. So I appeal to you to consider a different perspective based on that. Thank you very much.